Coming up, the morality of warfare.
The wars in both Iraq and Afghanistan, for me at least, have made me much more conservative about intervention, period.
Author and former Army officer Andrew Exum discusses America's wars, the limits of counterinsurgency, and civil-military relations. It's just ahead on Global Ethics Forum.
Our guest tonight is Andrew Exum, who I think I should describe by the venerable term of warrior scholar, though he actually is now something more modern, which is a warrior scholar businessman. So Andrew led units in Afghanistan and Iraq. After he did that, he then went to Beirut, learned Arabic, got his master's degree. He has worked with some of the leading think tanks in Washington. He has gone back, he's worked at the Pentagon. He has advised Stanley McChrystal, the former chief military officer in Afghanistan. He has taught a class of mine where he was a smash hit. And he now is working in the private sector at Boston Consulting Group. And so we're really delighted, Andrew, to have you here
thanks.
this evening. So let me ask you first. So when you went into the military, it was the 1990s, time of peace. From what I could tell from reading your book, you didn't sign up because you were itching to kill bad guys. And then 9/11 comes, and suddenly it turns out you've entered into what turns out to be an extraordinarily dangerous occupation. So how did you feel when you realized that the world had changed in that way?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. I got an Army scholarship I'm from East Tennessee, so joining the military at a young age was not anything that was completely out of the ordinary. I got into the University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and the question was how to afford that. And so it's just natural that I took an Army ROTC scholarship. I was one of 2 ROTC graduates in my class of 2,200. I joined the Army thinking that probably the most exciting thing I was going to do over a 4-year stint was maybe do a peacekeeping rotation in Bosnia or Kosovo or something like that. And that would be really hardcore. I graduated from the infantry course, from the Ranger course, and took over my first infantry platoon in April of 2001. And I was just coming back from a 5-mile run with my platoon that morning on September 11th. And I just got back from this, it was a hot day in upstate New York. I was in the 10th Mountain Division at Fort Drum. And we'd just gotten done with this, lengthy 5-mile run. And then I found out that we had a urinalysis, mandatory urinalysis later that morning. So I was studying for that urinalysis by drinking canteens of water, one after the other, when I got the news. And I watched the towers fall with my platoon. They still made me do the urinalysis. I was like, that's not the most important thing going on right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was obvious that the world had changed, and so my 4 years that I spent in the Army were completely different than I thought they were going to be.
Yeah, yeah. One thing that struck me in reading your book is you describe almost kind of de-Christianizing yourself, if I can use that word. That you realized you had to not be the person you had raised yourself to be in order to do the terrible things you had to do as a soldier. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. When I think my faith hit a real low point when I was in the Army. I'd grown up going to church and a strong believer, and it wasn't until really several years after my time in the Army that I really kind of clawed back. And I think what had struck me was, at a somewhat young age, even though I was blessed with this great critical thinking education, I wasn't ready for kind of the, and strike that, perhaps because I was blessed with this great critical thinking education, when, I remember in 2002 during Operation Anaconda, I killed a guy for the first time. And coming back to Bagram Air Base maybe 2 days later after this mission, I was fine. This guy he had a machine gun, so I was not, did not particularly mourn his passing or question, what I had done. But then when the battalion chaplain came to me and told me, he's like, in the Old Testament, the word is murder, not kill, and you didn't commit murder. And I was like, look, pal, if you're trying to make me think that Jesus wanted me to shoot somebody, you're probably not gonna. I'm fine with what I did. And then And then, you know, I think that he got really worried, and he was kind of an awkward guy, so he told the brigade chaplain about this. And the brigade chaplain came to see me, and I hid from the brigade chaplain. And I think he was like, oh, we've really got a problem with Lieutenant Exum. So they got the division chaplain to come down and see me. And my first sergeant, who was from Red Bank, Tennessee, which was adjacent to my hometown in East Tennessee, he caught me hiding behind a big pallet of meals ready to eat, of MREs. And he's like, sir, what are you doing? I said, I'm hiding from the chaplain, First Sergeant. Quiet. He's like, sir, you just need to tell him you're a bad son of a bitch from East Tennessee and you do this for sport. I was like, First Sergeant, I don't think that's a wise idea, but thank you so much for your concern for my personal morality. And you know, for the next 2-3 years, you know, I went back to combat several more times with the U.S. Army's Ranger Regiment, and just had the real honor to lead those men in combat. But I was never really comfortable with kind of this easy morality of everything that we were doing was right. Mm-hmm. And it was, you know, I think I left the Army in 2004, kind of America'd out, kind of very, you know, down on my faith, certainly at a low point. And it was actually spending those years abroad, worshiping abroad in churches all across the Middle East, that made me, you know, become more attached to my faith of my childhood. Oh. And made me love America again, because, you know, you spend a lot of time, nothing makes you love America than spending a lot of time outside of America, and you begin to appreciate all the great things about this country.
You were a classics major,
yeah,
in college, and I think one thing that people who live in places like the Northeast, where there's almost no military presence whatsoever, so nobody grows up knowing military people, one thing that people here have discovered that they didn't know before is that the military is full of highly educated, deeply thoughtful people, as well as not highly educated, not deeply thoughtful people. So I'm curious about your experience going into the military as a guy who had received an Ivy League education.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. It's one of those things where both parties are probably responsible for kind of the alienation of military from society. The military looks for really cheap real estate wherever it goes, so it puts its bases in, you know, where there's like a high proportion of sand and there aren't any cities nearby. That makes the military very separate from places like, you know, New York City and Boston and Washington, which are, to a lesser degree, Washington, but these places that are kind of the intellectual and business and academic capitals of the country. And so we get this idea that, oh, you know, it's only the poor people that go to the military, people that have nothing, you know, no other options. But the reality is that, especially the military officer corps tends to be middle class to upper middle class, and the enlisted corps in the military tends to be still pretty middle class. These are, you know, for the most part, the people that join the military, both enlisted and officer, come from, you know, pretty stable environments, not, you know, this idea that everybody grew up in, you know, either barefoot in, you know, Sale Creek, Tennessee, and nothing wrong with Sale Creek, Tennessee, it's where my family's from, or, you know, from like housing projects and in the Northeast. These are myths. I mean, the military and the people that are in the military come from a broad cross section of society, and you often find, you know, extremely well-educated folks.
So, Andrew, when you went back the second time, you were leading a Rangers unit in Iraq and Afghanistan. So our, I think, notion of that is, ooh, targeted killing. So is that what you did? What'd you do?
Yeah, I mean, so, I mean, I think in any you know, in any war, especially in one of the great tactical innovations, I think, that we've been able to really hone over the past 10 years has been our use of direct action, special operations, and combat. And I didn't much care for the movie Zero Dark 30 for the way in which I think it inaccurately and immorally you know, portrayed enhanced interrogation techniques or torture. But
because you thought that it didn't actually happen like that, or what?
Oh no, I think it may have happened like that, but I thought the way in which it led the movie created the cause and effect.
The idea that torture was
necessary.
We
wouldn't have been able to get, you know, Osama bin Laden unless we'd done these things. I thought the movie was, you know, in many ways repugnant for that reason and for that cause and effect that it drew. But I will say this: the last scene of that raid in Pakistan, that was the real deal. That looked very, very familiar. Yeah. And those skills were developed over, you know, over a 10-year period when we first.
So, but were you doing night raids? What were you doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in Iraq especially, as part of operations in both Iraq and Afghanistan. There's a kind of a broader daylight, type operations where you're really trying to protect the population and trying to establish some sort of security. You're doing aggressive patrolling, but at the same time, and you're trying to be very discriminate in how you kill. There's a real danger that you can exacerbate the drivers of conflict in any civil war environment if you begin to kill the wrong people. And so that type of discriminate violence, I think, is something that that the U.S. military has gotten very good at over the past 10 years, which is not to say there's not collateral damage. But as part of our operations in both Iraq and Afghanistan, part of what we were doing is trying to degrade the insurgent infrastructure and the insurgent command and control. So, and the degree that we can do that effectively depended as much on good intelligence as it did on kind of the guys at the pointy edge of the spear. And so it was a great privilege to lead those guys at the pointy edge of the spear, and the mission is very important. Doing it wrong and doing it, using those instruments as a blunt instrument can have catastrophic
Did you have
effects.
terrible moments where you think you did something wrong?
Yeah, I think that in 2003, and certainly in Iraq, in part because our intelligence was so poor, I would venture to say that we exacerbated the drivers of conflict in Iraq. If you've ever seen the movie The Battle of Algiers, where they have a set list of who's on their target list, and they're just kind of ticking guys off, and at the end of ticking those guys off, then they realize that they've got a list that's twice as long. That was very much us in 2003. So we were very much thought that we just had these, I think what the vice president called them, dead enders that we just had to take care of. And as soon as we did that, and then we were like, well, as soon as we get Saddam Hussein, the insurgency will be over. But probably the worst firefight I was in was 4 days after we got Saddam Hussein.
Really?
And that was kind of a wake-up call. Like, the conflict wasn't going to end just because we got, one or two guys.
Later, you became one of the leading exponents of and theorists of the idea of counterinsurgency doctrine. Was that based in part on your sense of what the U.S. had gotten wrong in both Iraq and Afghanistan in the early years?
Half and half. So I think halfway it was based on my own experiences, I think my interest in it. Half was, I wrote my doctoral dissertation on the Israelis in southern Lebanon in the 1990s. And so half was based on studying that. So when I went back to Afghanistan in 2009, I think I had two frames of reference.
Let's talk about that for a second, because Crystal invited you to come and give him advice. And this was at the crucial moment in early 2009 when Obama was being told by his generals, Afghanistan is way worse than we think, and Obama had been hoping just to add 17,000 more troops and that would be it, but in fact, clearly it was going to require much deeper treatment than that. So was your sense then that, as I think both McChrystal and Petraeus wound up telling the president, that this thing could be solved with both a big increase in troops and also a big change in doctrine towards this military-civilian thing that we call counterinsurgency?
Yeah, I think what we were doing in 2009 was a little bit different than that. So if you remember, in 2008, in the fall of 2008, people started raising warning flags. And the Bush administration got in both campaigns, the Obama campaign and the McCain campaign, and basically said, look, things are going south in Afghanistan. You need to be prepared to take immediate action when you come in. You're not gonna, we don't care which of you gets elected, but when you become elected, you're gonna have very limited time to respond to this worsening situation. In January, the Obama administration comes in and starts an immediate review of the war effort and kind of sets the policy objectives. And also sets a series of strategic goals, and this is all in the March 2009 white paper, if you want to go back and read it. But it's a series of pretty expansive goals of the things we're going to do in Afghanistan. Build up the Afghan government, defeat the insurgency, build up relations with our Pakistani partners on the other side.
It was the kind of early counterinsurgency plan before it became more full-blown.
This was like the policy and strategy. So if war takes place at 4 different levels, kind of the political, the strategic, the operational, the tactical, that March 2009 paper and the president's speeches really set both the president's policy and then his strategic objectives. They decided that they did not have their optimal commander in Afghanistan, and so they replaced General McKiernan, and replaced him with Stan McChrystal. And I think what McChrystal had to do was he had to think through, okay, if these are the this is his starting point. If these are the president's strategic objectives, how are we going to develop an operational plan that's going to meet those objectives? We did the initial assessment and really tried to determine how the conflict was going, and the answer was not well. And what scared us more than anything else was how little we knew about Afghanistan. So I first went there in the fall of 2001, 2002, or I'm sorry, the winter of 2001, 2002. I think I arrived in February 2002. And what scared me was just like how little we knew about the country. So if you asked, if I asked an intelligence officer on the ground in southern Afghanistan, right, tell me about your area of operations, he or she could give me kind of the answers that you'd expect a good intelligence officer to give. Here's the enemy, size, disposition, composition, most likely course of action, most dangerous course of action. But if you were to, take a step back and think, well, maybe what's driving the conflict is, corruption, not the presence of the Taliban. Well, then, okay, who controls the water in this district? Who's the governor? How'd the governor get appointed? Where's the governor from? Who'd the governor have lunch with yesterday? Like, who are his business ties? What are his ties to the insurgency? And at that stuff, we were just completely blank. And what was scary more than anything else was the fact that we really didn't know whether we were in control of Kandahar, which is like the second most important city in Afghanistan, and arguably the most important to the Taliban. And we had very poor intelligence on the city then. Going back about a year and a half later, I was amazed at the turnaround and how much smarter intelligence officers had gotten. But the scariest thing in 2009 was just how little we knew.
But so part of that conclusion was that you also needed to have a much bigger civilian presence in Afghanistan, right? So this idea is this combined military, and so that was actually a really, there's historical precedent for this, which you know very well, but that was a big decision, which Obama then spent months stewing over because he asked himself, can we make better governance in Iran? Can we reduce corruption? Can we increase the economy? Or is that just not possible for us?
Yeah, and I think the president probably, I think he did the right thing in the fall of 2009. In the fall of 2009, I think two things happened. First off, he gets that initial assessment that we worked on, and it was like, holy cow, we're losing this conflict. Then the second thing that happened were the Afghan presidential elections in September, which were most certainly corrupt.
Rigged.
Well, Karzai probably would have won anyway.
Yes,
probably didn't need to happen. So I think those two things gave the administration some pause. And I think they began to look at what their assumptions were going into that March 2009 paper.
Yeah.
And if your planning assumptions turn out to be false, then you have to go back and revise your plan. And so that's when I think the president came out, and in December 1st of 2009, he gave his speech to West Point.
Right.
The policy was the same about degrading al-Qaeda and making sure Afghanistan was going to be an al-Qaeda safe haven, but the strategic objectives below were much reduced. And I don't think the military ever really came to grips with what the president said in December 2000.
What's the part you think they didn't get?
That we weren't going to do counterinsurgency, or that we were going to do counterinsurgency, but in a very limited time.
Well, that's a very interesting point, because I certainly think that, not just the military, I think it was widely believed that Obama said, okay, I bought this thing that Petraeus and McChrystal are saying, we're going to do this big counterinsurgency, though in fact, if you talk to people in the White House, they'd say, no, Obama wants to do something much more limited.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's right. And this is where it gets really fascinating, and General McChrystal's subsequent dismissal gets really fascinating.
Today I accepted General Stanley McChrystal's resignation as commander.
Civil-military relations, and again, I think both parties have some blame here. The White House was never completely explicit about this. And even, you see now as the military is trying to plan for, what a potential stay-behind force would be in Afghanistan, and it took forever. It's like, well, how about 10,000? I'm looking at something different. It's kind of the go find a rock drill. It's like, nope, that's not the rock I'm looking for. So you come back and find another rock. And I think that's in some ways what the military's had to do with the White House. They've never wanted to be explicit about how few troops they want to leave, but they're probably getting there. I don't know, I haven't worked on Afghanistan in a while. Overall, I think that the guidance and that was given to the military was pretty poor in terms of not being explicit enough. And I think the military did a poor job of kind of reading the tea leaves in Washington and really trying to read the president.
Well, you had Stan McChrystal, as I recall, going to Marja and talking about setting up this government in a box and so forth. And so all that language made you think that this very complicated, subtle idea where you really have to recreate governance in a place, it was just so alien to the military culture, and indeed to our entire political culture, that we wouldn't have known how to carry it out if we truly were dedicated to carrying it out.
I think Rajiv Chandrasekaran's book, Little America and Helmand, is brilliant in terms of the way it lays out what actually did and did not happen.
Yeah.
And one of the conclusions that you come back from Rajiv's book with is that, first off, you can do it, and you can have an effect on both the security and on the, and on the positive developmental, whatever metrics that you choose. Whether or not that's enduring depends on a lot of factors that are outside of your control. And so I think that, one of the lessons that I take from it is that the U.S. military, State Department, USAID is actually capable of doing pretty awesome things on the ground. But whenever
So why did things go so badly then?
Well, I'm not sure they have gone badly.
Oh, really? Okay.
I think the point that I would make is that they've gone really well. How much money it took and whether or not it's going to be enduring, I think that's the key issue.
Okay.
So in Iraq, for example, Iraq is now experiencing levels of violence that are back to the pre-surge, days. Like, we have reached the worst case scenario in Iraq. Was the surge, did it work? Absolutely. It was able to reduce those levels of those drivers of conflict and was able to buy the government of Iraq time and space in order to carry, in order to have a peaceful political process. Was it enduring? That was on the government of Iraq. You have to be realistic about what you can and can't get. And you have to think, I don't think we did a very good job of thinking through at the same time we were doing this great stuff on the ground, how we were going to affect the political process in Afghanistan as well. So we had a great military strategy. I think we had a decent development strategy. I think we had a really poor political strategy. And when you look at both Iraq and Afghanistan, many of the issues in Iraq and Afghanistan, I think that our U.S. Marines and our USAID folks on the ground in Helmand Province, I think they did a great job. And I think they were able to affect real, tangible change. But whether or not that change is enduring depends on factors that are ultimately outside of their control. And so if there's, I think where we stand to be chastened is when we're in these environments and when we commit to these environments in the first place. And so the wars in both Iraq and Afghanistan, for me at least, have made me much more conservative about intervention, period. Because once you decide to commit, then you really are at the mercy of, as Clausewitz would say, you've got your rational, irrational, and non-rational forces, that comprise this experience of war. And those, the fog of war is something that's often out of your control. And there are a lot of factors that you may not have direct control over.
When you left the military, you moved to Beirut to do a master's and learn Arabic. So
yeah.
What was your thought about what you wanted to do with your life that caused you to do that?
Yeah, well, I just invaded my second country, and I knew nothing about the language, the culture, the people of the country I just invaded.
Yeah.
And I always thought that I was going to go into the military and then move back home to Tennessee and be like some country lawyer. And I remember sitting there on the hood of my Humvee in Iraq and talking to and this is a great example of the type of people that are in the military. This guy right now works in the White House and personnel. He's a fantastic soldier. He was a sergeant, an enlisted soldier in the Rangers, but was captain of the baseball team at James Madison and got like a 178 on the LSAT, which is a very high score. And decided, nope, I'm going to enlist in the Ranger Regiment instead of going to law school. And just a remarkable character. And I was like, Colin, do I really want to go to law school next year? And he's like, sir, do you really want to study torts next year? And the answer to that was definitely no. But I was very curious about this, this region that I'd been plucked into and that I was engaging with from behind, body armor and a weapon. So I made the decision in the spring of 2004 to leave the military, and I matriculated at the American University of Beirut, lived in Cairo a little bit, and then went back to Beirut to do the field work for my dissertation.
So how long did you actually spend living in the Middle East?
Probably about 3 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So yeah, that's another thing. When I came, and this is relevant because by the summer of 2009, when I went to Afghanistan, I would, if I were to fault myself in some things, I'd spent most of the past decade not living in America. And I think one of the things that a lot of us got wrong in 2009, thinking about what the strategy should be in Afghanistan, was we got the politics wrong.
Yeah.
America was tired
The
of war
domestic
at that point.
appetite.
That's exactly right.
But so I'm curious, you lived for 3 years in the Middle East. So how would you say that changed you?
I mean, we already spoke about one way, in the sense that, you know, by the time I came back to America, I'd fallen back in love with my country. First, I loved the Middle East, so it wasn't as if there was opposition there. But it was also, you know, an incredibly broadening experience. I think that sometimes, I mean, for me at least, and I'm speaking at the wise old age of 35, but sometimes, you know, the best broadening experiences entail going very deep into something. And I think those years that I immersed myself specifically in Lebanon and in my doctoral dissertation, just, you know, it opens up the world in a different way. Because when you go to other places, you know, if you really take the time to learn a region, study the languages, you know, really immerse yourself in a different culture, in a different region, in different histories and peoples, then you know what you don't know when you go to other places. And so, you know, you can plop me down in, I don't know, Colombia, and I don't know anything about Colombia, but I know a lot of what I don't know. You know, I know I haven't spent the time in the region. I think it taught me humility in a way, which is a thing that I think every young man in his 20s should learn.
Yeah,
so,
I imagine.
I'm still working on it.
You know, that a fair amount of time in Afghanistan and Iraq will teach a person humility
right.
as well.
That's exactly right.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Sure.
This has been a great conversation.
Yeah,
It's
sure.
really great.
Yeah, thank you.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.